My name is Jade Calloway. I am 31 years old, and on the night of December 14th, I walked into a black tie gala wearing a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and a pair of clean white sneakers. There was a string quartet playing inside. There were 120 people in formal wear seated at linen-draped tables. There were champagne flutes and sponsored centerpieces, and a banner on the stage wall that read MCG Events 5 Years of Excellence. I stood at the entrance, and a security guard told me this was a private event. I said I believed I was on the list. I was not on the list. A second guard came over. The commotion was just enough to draw eyes from the nearest tables. And then my mother, Patricia Calloway, walked over from the front of the room in a burgundy gown and pearl earrings, looked at me the way you look at something you thought you had already disposed of, and said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "Give her $1 and throw her in the street. She does this sometimes." A few people laughed, not everyone. Some looked uncomfortable and looked away. I registered every face, every expression, every small social calculation happening in real time around me. And then I put my hand in the front pocket of my hoodie and took out my phone. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a speech. I turned slightly toward the security guard, and I spoke in the same voice I had used on job sites for 4 years of running an actual company. Clear. Level. No shake in it. I'm not here for $1. I opened the email my attorney had sent me at 3:17 that afternoon. The legal non-renewal notice, the original lease document, the building landlord's written confirmation. I turned the screen toward the guard and let him read it. I'm here because the commercial lease on this building expires in 5 minutes. It's registered under my LLC, and I am not renewing it. Silence moves through a room the way water moves through a crack in concrete. You don't see it happening, but suddenly everything is different. It started at the entrance and spread outward, table by table, until the string quartet played one final phrase and stopped. 120 people, not one of them speaking. My brother Marcus, who was across the room when it started, was moving quickly through the tables now, cutting through the crowd in his tuxedo. I watched him calculate and recalculate as he got closer and began to understand what he was looking at. He reached me. He looked at the phone. He looked at me. Then he grabbed my arm. I looked at his hand. I looked at him. I spoke quietly enough that only he and the guards and my mother could hear me. "Take your hand off of me, Marcus." He let go. That was December 14th. That was the moment. But to understand why it mattered, you have to go back 9 years. You have to go back to a 22-year-old woman in her apartment kitchen at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night with a borrowed mixing bowl, a church bulletin with a catering inquiry circled in pen, and a spreadsheet she had built herself from scratch because she didn't know any other way to figure out if an idea was real. That woman was me. This is my story. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, a working-class neighborhood in the northeast of the city, the kind of block where everyone knew your mother's car and your business was publicly available information at the Tuesday morning church circle. My mother, Patricia Calloway, was an office manager at a commercial property firm downtown. She was precise and efficient at her job, and she cared, more than I understood as a child, about what the people around her thought of her family. Not in a shallow way, or at least not entirely. She genuinely believed that appearance and reputation were load-bearing structures in a life. She built her identity on that belief. My brother Marcus was 6 years older than me. He was the kind of person who commanded a room without trying, the kind of easy social magnetism that is impossible to manufacture and equally impossible to resist. He had done 2 years at community college and then moved through a series of sales positions, never quite staying anywhere long enough to build something, but always looking the part, always with the right shoes and the right handshake and the right story for whoever he happened to be talking to. My mother adored him. She adored the way he performed. And then there was me, quiet Jade, the one who showed up early to every family gathering and stayed late in the kitchen. The one all the aunts and uncles would say you should open a restaurant to. The way you'd tell a child who draws well that she should be an artist, not because you believe it will happen, but because it's the nicest thing you can think to say. A compliment shaped like a joke. At 22, I decided to take it seriously. I didn't have capital. I didn't have a mentor or a business degree or a network of investors. What I had was a talent I had spent my whole life exercising without recognition, a set of organizational instincts I hadn't yet named as skills, and a willingness to run the numbers at 11 o'clock at night until they told me the truth. I found a catering inquiry in a church bulletin, a potluck dinner for 70 people, and I quoted the job. I got it. I made $340 profit in one afternoon, and I stood in my kitchen afterwards still wearing my apron and thought, this is real. This works. I named the business Callaway Catering and Events. I registered the LLC Callaway Creative Enterprises LLC in my name, and only my name. Because I was 22 and doing this alone, and didn't know yet that this particular detail would become the most important sentence in this entire story. The first year was slow and grinding. I catered a birthday party for 50 people in a church fellowship hall, a retirement lunch for 22, a baby shower where I made 400 finger sandwiches and drove them across town in coolers, strapped into the back of a second-hand minivan I had purchased for $4,000 cash. I washed my own linens. I handled the shopping, the prep, the service, and the cleanup. I was the entire company. I barely broke even on most jobs and came out ahead on a few, and I kept every dollar of profit in a separate account and watched it grow the way you watch a plant you're not sure is going to survive. The second year, I got my first corporate referral. A cousin mentioned my name to her manager at a mid-sized consulting firm. The job was a working lunch for 40 people, every Tuesday, recurring weekly. I priced it carefully, factoring in food cost, labor, transport, and a margin that would let me reinvest. I showed up on time, every single Tuesday, with the right food at the right temperature with the right setup. By month 3, the office manager told me I was the first caterer they'd worked with who had never gotten an order wrong. In month 6, they added a Thursday lunch. Word moved the way word moves in professional networks when someone does their job with consistency and care. By year 3, Callaway Catering and Events had 12 regular corporate clients, a part-time crew of 3, and enough monthly revenue that I was ready to stop operating out of my apartment kitchen and go find a real space. I signed a commercial lease on a 1,400-square-foot kitchen and event prep facility in the Oakley neighborhood of Cincinnati. 3-year term, 2 renewal options. Monthly rent of $3,200. The lease was in the name of my LLC. I signed it with my own hand on a Thursday afternoon in April, and I remember the way the key felt when the property manager handed it to me. A small utilitarian key to a commercial space that smelled like industrial cleaner and possibility. I stood in that empty kitchen for 10 minutes before I did anything else. Concrete floor, bare stainless prep surfaces, the hum of the refrigeration unit, afternoon light through the loading dock window. I thought about the church potluck. I thought about the 11 o'clock spreadsheets. I thought about every job I had driven to in the minivan with coolers in the back. And I thought, I built this. Every dollar in this lease came from something I made with my own hands, my own planning, my own idea. Nobody handed me this. I earned the right to stand here. At 26, I landed the contract that changed the scale of everything. Meridian Group, a 200-person consulting firm with a downtown Cincinnati office, was looking for a catering partner for their full event calendar. Internal team lunches, client-facing meetings, quarterly all-hands gatherings, and a summer company picnic. The contract was worth $8,400 per month, every month, recurring, guaranteed for 18 months with a renewal option. I remember driving home after signing the Meridian contract and calling my mother. She said, "Oh, that's nice, Jade." Then she asked if I had heard from Marcus because he was having trouble with his car again, and she thought maybe I could lend him some money. By year 4, the business was generating $180,000 in gross annual revenue. I had 6 employees. I had a waiting list for private event bookings that ran 3 months. I was in preliminary conversations with another landlord about a second location in the Hyde Park neighborhood. I had a commercial kitchen license, a catering certification, a business insurance policy, and a portfolio of client testimonials that had taken me 4 years of unglamorous early morning, late night. Nobody is watching work to accumulate. My mother called what I did Jade's catering thing. When people at her church asked about her children, she talked about Marcus. When people asked specifically about me, she would say I was doing my little business. I stopped being bothered by this at some point. I had the numbers. The numbers didn't need her approval to be real. What I want you to understand about those 4 years is what the actual daily work looked like. Not the milestone moments, not the Meridian contract signing or the lease key or the quarterly revenue milestone, but the ordinary Tuesday. The ordinary Tuesday looked like this. Alarm at 4:30 in the morning, drive to the Oakley kitchen by 5, receive the produce delivery, check it against the order, reject 2 flats of strawberries that arrived soft, and spend 11 minutes on the phone with the supplier arranging a credit and an emergency replacement. Start prep on the corporate lunch for 65 people at Meridian. Brief the 2 staff members arriving at 6. Monitor the prep line. Catch a seasoning problem before it becomes 65 portions of a seasoning problem. Load the van. Drive downtown. Set up. Serve. Break down. Return to the kitchen. Start prep for the Thursday private dinner. Answer 14 emails. Update the billing records. Handle a scheduling conflict for the weekend event. Drive home at 7 in the evening. Eat whatever was left from prep. Open the laptop and review the cash flow projections for the next 30 days. Set the alarm for 4:30. That was the ordinary Tuesday. 4 years of ordinary Tuesdays. That is what $180,000 in annual gross revenue looks like from the inside. It does not look like a highlight reel. It does not look like the kind of thing that gets celebrated at a company gala with a string quartet and champagne. It looks like a person who decided what her work was going to be and then organized her entire life, her sleep schedule and her relationships and her weekend plans and her ambitions, around the discipline of showing up and doing it correctly every single day, without recognition, without an audience, and without anyone in her personal life treating it as a real and significant thing. I am telling you this because the thing that was eventually taken was not only a financial asset, not only a revenue stream or a client list or a commercial lease, it was the accumulated product of 4 years of 4:30 alarms and supplier negotiations and seasoning corrections and cash flow analysis. It was time. Specific, irreplaceable, embodied time that belongs to the person who spent it and cannot be transferred no matter what documents get forged or what signatures get replicated. I want you to hold that in mind as we go forward, because everything that follows is a story about a woman who understood, with complete precision, what had been taken from her, and who built every decision in the 14 months that followed around that understanding. She did not grieve publicly. She did not negotiate. She documented, and she waited, and she knew exactly what she was waiting for. But the numbers made Marcus pay attention. Marcus lost his job at a tech accessories distribution company in the spring of year 4. 14 months of tenure, his longest stretch anywhere, and then a restructuring round that let him go along with 11 other people. He called me on a Wednesday evening, and I could hear in his voice the particular flavor of embarrassment that comes from a man who has spent years performing competence and has just been publicly handed evidence to the contrary. We talked for an hour. He vented about the company, about the industry, about how people who come from where we come from never get a fair shot inside systems built by and for people who already had the advantages. There was something real in what he was saying. There is always something real in what Marcus says. That is part of what makes him effective and part of what makes him dangerous, because the real thing is the doorway through which the other things enter. I listened. I made the sounds that you make when someone you love is hurting and you want them to feel heard. I genuinely felt for him. I want to name that clearly, because what came next does not make me stupid for having felt it. It makes me a person who loves her brother. The feeling was appropriate. The access I gave in response to that feeling was where I made my miscalculation. Then he said, "You know, Jade, you have really built something real over there. I have been thinking about it a lot. Maybe I could come help you out, take some of the client-facing pressure off, learn the business properly. You are clearly running yourself into the ground and you need another set of hands you can actually trust." I was running myself into the ground. That was true. 6 employees to manage, 12 corporate accounts to maintain, a second location in early negotiations, and a physical operation that required me to be present in ways that a purely administrative business does not. I was exhausted in a way that had become my baseline. Marcus had a genuine skill that I lacked. He could talk to people. disarm them, make them feel like they were the most important person in the room, I thought. He handles client relationships. I focus on operations and growth. We divide the work along our actual strengths. I bring family into the business I built, and maybe, for the first time, Mom sees what I've built and takes it seriously because her son is part of it. I gave him access. Not carelessly, not all at once, but incrementally and with what I thought was appropriate structure. I added him to the business email account as a secondary user. I shared the client contact database. I gave him read-only access to the bookkeeping software so he could understand billing cycles and contract values. I introduced him to my 6 largest corporate clients as the company's new director of client relations. What I did not know was what was happening simultaneously on my mother's side. 3 years earlier, I had added Patricia to my LLC's operating agreement as an emergency authorized signatory. It was a precaution taken during a health scare, a period when I genuinely feared I might need surgery and need someone able to sign business documents on my behalf if I was incapacitated. The scare passed without requiring surgery. I recovered and went back to work and forgot entirely that I had made that change. It felt like a technicality I would never need. Patricia had not forgotten. Over the 4 months that followed Marcus's arrival at the company, 2 processes ran simultaneously and completely outside my awareness. The first, Marcus was meeting privately with my top revenue corporate clients, not to service the relationships I had built, but to reposition himself. He was telling them that leadership changes were coming at Callaway Catering, that a restructure was underway, that they should expect to work directly with him going forward. He used my client database, my business email, and my supplier contacts, all of which I had given him access to build a picture of a transition that I had never authorized and never been told about. The second, Patricia used her authorized signatory status to execute a contract transfer. The Meridian Group account, my largest client and the financial anchor of the entire business, was transferred to a new LLC, MCG Events LLC, registered in Marcus's name. The transfer document listed Patricia as authorized signatory for Callaway Creative Enterprises. The signature was hers. The authority behind it was not. Over 6 weeks, the business bank account, to which Patricia also had co-signatory access from the same health scare period, was drained of $34,000. Not one large transaction. Small, spaced withdrawals. $40, $200, $800, $1,800. The kind of pattern that does not trigger automated alerts, that looks like normal operating expense flow if you're not watching closely, that bleeds you out over weeks while you're distracted running the actual business. And then the emails. My incoming business communications were rerouted to Marcus's account. Client questions about upcoming bookings, scheduling requests, inquiries from new potential corporate clients, contract renewal discussions, all of it flowing to him, none of it reaching me. I was logging in, seeing reduced traffic, attributing it to a slow spring season, trusting the system I had built because I had no reason not to. I found out on a Thursday. A client called my personal cell phone. She said she'd been trying to reach the business for 3 weeks and kept getting responses from a man named Marcus who told her I had stepped back to focus on other projects. She wanted to know if I was all right. I told her I was fine. I said I would follow up. I hung up the phone and sat at my kitchen table without moving for a long time. Then I started pulling every thread I could reach. It took 4 days to build the full picture. The Meridian transfer, the bank withdrawals, the email rerouting, the client meetings Marcus had conducted under the cover of my company's name. By the end of those 4 days, I had a notebook filled with dates and amounts and screenshots, and I had lost the ability to be surprised by anything, which is a particular kind of loss that I have not entirely recovered from. I called my mother. I told her exactly what I had found. I said, "What did you do?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the voice she uses when she has already decided how the conversation ends, "You were never going to be able to handle this at this level, Jade. Marcus has the head for business. You have the heart for cooking. Know the difference." I have thought about that sentence almost every day since. Not with rage, or at least not only with rage, with a kind of cold, analytical attention, because that sentence tells you everything about how she had already justified what she did. She needed me to be insufficient. She needed my inadequacy to be the reason, so that what she and Marcus had done could be reclassified in her mind as intervention rather than theft. If I couldn't handle it, then what they did was save it. The story required a version of me that didn't exist, and she had committed to that version completely. I contacted Sandra Okafor, a business litigation attorney in Columbus. I drove to her office with a folder 3 inches thick and spent 2 hours walking her through the timeline. At the end of our second meeting, she said, "What they did is actionable on multiple fronts. The contract transfer is fraudulent. The withdrawals are civil theft. The email rerouting is tortious interference. And you can pursue all of it." She paused. "But Jade, this will be slow and expensive. You have $34,000 less than you had 2 months ago. I need you to understand what you are walking into before we start swinging." I understood. I couldn't afford the full fight yet. My staff had already been rehired under MCG events. My clients had been told I stepped away. My suppliers were fielding calls from Marcus's new operation. The business had been walked out from under me while I was still standing in it. I moved to Columbus. I got a waitressing job at a restaurant near German Village and worked 4 nights a week. The other 3 nights I spent rebuilding my financial records, meeting with Sandra, and sitting with documents spread across my kitchen table, mapping the exact sequence of what had been taken and through which mechanism. I needed to know the sequence precisely because the sequence was the evidence. You cannot fight what you cannot name. So I named it, document by document, dollar by dollar, timestamp by timestamp, until the picture was complete, and there was no version of events that could accommodate innocence on either side. That period also rebuilt me in a more fundamental way. I had spent 4 years running a business on instinct and momentum, and the assumption that the people closest to me were at minimum neutral actors in my life. That assumption was gone. What replaced it was not paranoia, because paranoia is indiscriminate and I had no interest in becoming indiscriminate. What replaced it was precision. A clearer understanding of who had access to what in my life, and why, and under what conditions, and with what documented boundaries. A sharper distinction between trust that has been earned over time and trust extended in advance on the basis of shared blood or feeling. These are not the same thing. I had treated them as if they were. I did not make that mistake again. And 14 months later, Sandra found the one thing they had forgotten to take. While I was in Columbus rebuilding, a story was spreading through Cincinnati. I did not learn its full shape all at once. It came to me in pieces, through a cousin who got vague when I asked specific questions, through a childhood friend's hesitant text that mentioned she had heard some things, through the way people who had known me for 20 years stopped being in touch, which is a silence that speaks clearly if you know how to listen. My mother and brother had constructed a narrative, and they were distributing it systematically through every social space they occupied. The narrative was this: Jade had experienced a breakdown. It had been coming for some time. The pressure of running the business had proved too much for her. She had made a series of poor decisions, financially and personally. She was not doing well. They had tried to intervene, but she had refused help. They had stepped in to protect the employees and clients from being abandoned. They were doing what family does in a crisis. That was the story. And it was told by a woman who attended church twice a week and was known in her community as a person of good judgment and deep concern for her family. It was told by a son who had his mother's social intelligence and his own natural charm. It was told to people who had no reason to doubt either of them, and every reason to sympathize. The first version was relatively mild. Jade had a breakdown. Jade was struggling, very sad. The second version added texture. Jade had lost everything with the business. She was not in a good place. The third version, which circulated through the church and through the neighborhood and through Patricia's professional network at the property firm, had hardened into something with sharper edges. Jade had gone off the rails. She was living rough for a while, maybe out of her car, hard to say exactly. She said things sometimes that didn't make sense. You know how some people just aren't built for the pressure, homeless and crazy. Not in those words, not explicitly, but that was the shape of the story when it had fully formed. And that shape served a specific function. It answered the question that anyone who had watched me build the business for 4 years would naturally ask: Why did Jade suddenly disappear from her own company? The answer the story provided was because she fell apart. And if she fell apart, then Marcus stepping in was rescue. And if Marcus's rescue was actually theft, well, you couldn't really take that seriously because you know how Jade is. I want to name this clearly because I think it matters. What my mother and brother deployed was a specific, targeted silencing mechanism. Not violence, not a legal maneuver, a story. They understood, perhaps instinctively, that the most effective way to neutralize someone who might speak loudly about what had been done to them was to preemptively destroy the credibility of that speech. If Jade says they stole from her, and everyone who knows Jade has already heard that Jade is unstable and unreliable and has been going through things, then what Jade says becomes noise. It becomes the kind of claim that concerned people pat you on the hand about and don't investigate. It is a blade. It is precise. And it was wielded by people who knew me, which is the only reason it worked as well as it did. For a period after I moved to Columbus, I went quiet. Not because I believed the narrative, not because I had accepted it, because Sandra had told me clearly, if you start posting, if you start making calls, if you become publicly loud and visibly angry, they will point to it as confirmation of everything they've already said. You become the evidence of their story. The discipline required is to not become that evidence. So I was quiet. I worked my shifts. I met with Sandra. I built the new business slowly in Columbus. I watched from a distance as MCG Events grew in the space I had built, with the client relationships I had developed, using the name Callaway as a legacy that had been stripped from its origin and reattached to something else entirely. I let them have the narrative. For 14 months, I let them have it. What they did not know was that silence, when it is purposeful, is not surrender. It is a form of reloading. And I had one specific thing I was waiting to do, on one specific date, and I was not going to do anything to jeopardize it. Sandra called me on a Tuesday in October, 14 months after I moved to Columbus. I was between shifts at the restaurant, sitting in my car in the parking lot, eating a sandwich I had made at home, because I was watching every dollar carefully. I almost let the call go to voicemail, she said. Jade, pull up your original commercial lease documents, the Oakley space. Do you have them accessible? I had them. I had everything. Every document from the original business, scanned and sorted and saved in a cloud folder with subfolders by category and date. Because even in the middle of everything falling apart, I had understood that the documents were going to matter. Opening that folder still felt like opening a room that I had sealed because the smoke inside it was too thick to breathe. But I opened it. Sandra had been doing a quiet property records review as part of the ongoing fraud documentation. In commercial property records, which are public in Ohio, she had found something that she wanted to verify against my original paperwork. The commercial lease on the Oakley kitchen space was structured with Callaway Creative Enterprises LLC as the leaseholder of record. The original 3-year term had concluded. A first renewal option had been exercised. There was a renewal addendum in the property management files. Sandra had requested a copy. The signature on that addendum claimed to be mine. She compared it against the original lease, which bore my actual signature, and against other documents I had provided. The signatures did not match. They were close. Someone had practiced, but they were not mine. The first renewal option had been fraudulently exercised. MCG Events had been operating in that space on a forged renewal. And the second renewal option, the final one, the 3-year extension that would allow MCG Events to continue operating in the Oakley space, had never been filed. It had never been signed. It had a deadline specified in the original lease agreement. The deadline was December 14th. The second renewal option, Sandra said carefully, can only be exercised by the leaseholder of record. That is Callaway Creative Enterprises LLC, which is you. I sat in the parking lot of the restaurant with my half-eaten sandwich and a silence in me that was not emptiness but the opposite of emptiness. What happens, I said, if I don't exercise it? The lease expires at midnight on December 14th. The 30-day vacancy clause in the original agreement activates immediately. MCG Events has 30 days to vacate the Oakley space. She paused, to let that land. Their commercial kitchen and catering licenses are registered at that address. Change of address voids those licenses until refiled. Any contracts that reference the licensed kitchen address become legally complicated. I had been watching MCG events from Columbus for 14 months. Not obsessively, not in a way that was consuming me, but with the steady, peripheral attention of someone who understands that information is an asset. I knew about the corporate event contract they had been positioning as their flagship account for the new year, a 6-month cycle starting in January worth $60,000, with a specific clause requiring a licensed commercial kitchen at a certified address. That January contract? I said. If they lose the address, Sandra said, they lose the license certification that contract requires. I set the sandwich down on the passenger seat. I looked at the restaurant parking lot. I thought about the $34,000. I thought about 6 employees who had shown up to work every day and been good at their jobs and had been quietly redirected into a new company without anyone explaining to them what had actually happened. I thought about the Meridian Group contract, the one that had made everything feel possible, signed away on a document bearing a forged version of my name. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone. You have the heart for cooking. Know the difference. I'm not signing the renewal, I said. Sandra said, okay, then we do this the right way. No posts, no calls, no threats, no contact with Marcus or your mother about any of this. On December 14th, I file the legal non-renewal notice with the landlord and serve a copy to MCG Events. Everything documented, everything clean. Is there anything that could prevent it? I asked. Only if they somehow got you to sign the renewal before the deadline, which they cannot do if they don't know the deadline is coming. They did not know. I went back to work. I finished the shift. I drove home and opened my laptop and wrote the date in a document I kept for this purpose, a private running record of the timeline, December 14th. And then I closed the laptop and made dinner and went to bed and started counting down the 9 months I had to wait. 9 months. I kept rebuilding. The Columbus business grew steadily. I hired 2 part-time assistants. I took on a small roster of private clients. I reinvested everything I made and kept my fixed costs deliberately low, because I wanted to be stable when December came, and I wanted to have made that stability entirely on my own. And I watched as Marcus and Patricia spent 8 months building toward the gala. They called it the Callaway Gala. The invitation went out in October to their entire professional network. Black tie charity event and industry showcase. December 14th. The Oakley venue, which they had continued to renovate over the preceding year with money I can only speculate about. 120 guests. Corporate sponsors listed on the program. A table at the front for $15,000 reserved for Patricia and her church group and her colleagues from the property firm. The invitation read, "Celebrating 5 years of excellence in Cincinnati events and catering." 5 years of excellence. The first 4 of those years were mine. The 5th was built on the infrastructure I had created, the client relationships I had cultivated, the kitchen I had leased, the reputation I had earned, one punctual, accurate, professionally delivered job at a time. Marcus had chosen the date for the gala with the intention of making it a capstone, a moment where MCG Events would be publicly and unequivocally established as a legitimate force in the Cincinnati events industry. He had no idea that the date he had chosen was also the expiration date of the only legal instrument he had not managed to take from me. Sandra filed the non-renewal notice with Mr. Harrington, the building's landlord, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She called me at 3:17 to confirm receipt and written acknowledgement. The lease would expire at midnight. The 30-day vacancy clock would begin. Mr. Harrington had been informed. Everything was documented, everything was clean. At 4 in the afternoon, I sat in my apartment and got dressed for the gala. I want to be precise about the hoodie, because the choice was not casual. For 14 months, my mother had been telling her community that I was unstable, that I had fallen apart, that I had been living rough. She had handed me a costume, the homeless woman, the failed daughter, the one who couldn't hold it together. I put on that costume deliberately. I put on the hoodie and the clean jeans and the white sneakers, and I stood in my mirror and thought, let me show you exactly what your story looks like walking through the door. And let's see what the contrast between that image and the document on my phone does to the room. That is not petty. That is precision storytelling. And I had learned in 4 years of running a business and 14 months of waiting that the story you tell with your body in a room is as powerful as anything you say with your mouth. I drove to Cincinnati alone, 2 hours on the interstate. I had the radio off most of the way. I was not nervous, or at least not in the way you are nervous before something you're not sure you can do. I was the way you are right before a job you have prepared for completely. Steady, present, aware of every detail. I parked 2 blocks from the Oakley venue. I sat in the car for 4 minutes, not to gather courage, to make sure my breathing was right, to make sure the steadiness was real and not performed, to make sure I was going to walk into that room as exactly who I was and not as any version of who anyone else needed me to be. Then I walked toward the building I had put my name on 9 years ago. They had done good renovation work on the exterior. New paint, updated lighting, the loading dock gated and neat. The windows glowed warm from inside, and through the glass, I could see the silhouettes of formally dressed people moving in a room that smelled, even from outside, like the pulled pork and roasted vegetables I recognized from a menu I had developed. The string quartet was audible from the sidewalk. I had always wanted to offer a string quartet option for high-end event packages. I had the contact for a local ensemble. I had just never quite had the event budget to justify it. The security guards at the entrance were in dark suits. They registered my presence the way security guards register anything that doesn't fit the established frame. A woman in a hoodie at the entrance of a formal gala. They stepped toward me. I said I was on the list. The list was checked. My name was not there. A second guard was called. There was a brief professional back and forth that was just loud enough and just unusual enough to attract the attention of people near the entrance. Heads turned. Conversations paused. And then I heard her. Patricia Calloway moved through the crowd from the front of the room with the deliberate composure of a woman who has already decided how a situation ends. She was wearing a deep burgundy gown that she had probably purchased for this specific occasion. She had the pearl earrings she saves for church and funerals. She looked like exactly what she had spent 30 years building herself to look like, a successful, respectable woman of standing. She saw me. Something crossed her face. Not guilt, not panic, but a specific, calculating contempt. The expression of someone who has told a story many times and has just seen the main character arrive to complicate it. And then she made her choice. She smiled. Small, controlled, performing. And she said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Oh, sweetie, give her $1 and throw her in the street. She does this sometimes." A few people laughed. I registered each face that laughed and each face that didn't. The ones who didn't laugh looked away, which is a different kind of information, but information nonetheless. I did not look at the people who laughed. I looked at my mother, and then I reached into the pocket of my hoodie and took out my phone. I turned to the security guard. I opened Sandra's email. I showed him the screen, and I kept my voice at the same volume I would use to give instructions on a job site. "I'm not here for $1. I'm here because the commercial lease on this building expires in 5 minutes. It's registered under my LLC, Calloway Creative Enterprises. I'm not renewing it. You can confirm that with Mr. Harrington. I have his number right here." The guard read the document. He looked up at me. He looked back at the document. He was not equipped to arbitrate a commercial lease dispute, and he knew it. He looked at my mother. He looked at the other guard. He had no move to make. The silence had already started spreading. It moved the way I described earlier outward from the entrance in waves, conversation by conversation, table by table, until the string quartet played one last bar and stopped. 120 people in a room, and no one was speaking. Marcus arrived. He had been at the back of the room when the disruption began, and had been moving through the tables with increasing urgency as the silence expanded and reached him. He came in his tuxedo, his face cycling through calculations that I could read because I had known this face for 31 years. He looked at the phone. He looked at me. He grabbed my arm. I looked at his hand on my arm. I looked at him. I spoke at a volume that only the guards and my mother and Marcus could hear. "Take your hand off of me." He let go. He tried to speak. He started 2 sentences that didn't reach a verb. He looked at the security guard in the way a person looks at whoever is present when they need someone else to handle the situation they have created. "The landlord received notice at 3 o'clock this afternoon," I said, clearly, to the room, not shouting, just clearly. "His name is Mr. Harrington. As of midnight tonight, MCG Events has no operating lease on this property. You can confirm that with him directly. I have his number if anyone needs it." Uncle Derek was the first person to stand up from a table. He didn't speak, he just stood. He looked at me across the room with the expression of a man who had known something was wrong for a long time and was experiencing the particular exhaustion of having been right. Grace, who had been one of my original employees and had been working this event as a coordinator for MCG Events, was standing near the side wall holding a clipboard. When the silence fell and did not break, she set the clipboard down on the table beside her. Quietly. No scene. Just set it down. That small gesture, that clipboard going down. Of every moment in that entire evening, that was the one that nearly broke my composure. Because Grace was not my enemy. Grace was a 29-year-old woman who had needed her job and had made choices from a limited set of options. And the clipboard going down was the first honest thing she had done in the direction of this situation in 2 years. It cost her something. In that room, in that moment. I saw it. I turned and walked out of the building. Sandra was already on the phone by the time I reached my car. She had been monitoring her email and had received a follow-up confirmation from Mr. Harrington at 11:47, 13 minutes before midnight, acknowledging receipt of the non-renewal and confirming the 30-day vacancy provision was now active. MCG Events had until January 14th to vacate the Oakley space. The clock was running. I sat in my car and listened to Sandra walk me through the timeline in the precise, unhurried voice she uses when she has done her job correctly and wants you to understand each piece of it. When she finished, I said thank you. Then I sat in the quiet of the car for a while before starting the engine. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. Not the easy answer, the real one. "Tired," I said, and completely awake. In the days that followed, I learned what had happened inside the room after I left. 3 of MCG Events' corporate guests departed before the dinner service began. Marcus spent roughly 40 minutes attempting to manage the situation, telling nearby tables there was a legal misunderstanding being handled, stepping outside to call his attorney. His attorney confirmed what Sandra had already confirmed. The non-renewal was valid. The documentation was clean. The timeline was binding. There was no challenge to mount. The January contract, the flagship corporate event cycle that MCG Events had positioned as the foundation of their New Year growth, required a licensed commercial kitchen at a specific certified address. That address was the Oakley space. In mid-January, when MCG Events notified the client of their operational situation, the client invoked a contract clause allowing termination due to operational instability. The $60,000 contract was canceled. MCG Events relocated to a shared commercial kitchen arrangement in Blue Ash, roughly 30 minutes from the Oakley location. Their catering and kitchen licenses had to be refiled under the new address. The refiling process, with inspections and certification verification, took 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, they could not legally operate at the capacity their remaining contracts required. I did not post about any of this. I did not make calls. I did not send messages to anyone in the industry or in the family network. I let the facts move at the speed facts move, which is slower than rumors, but considerably more permanent. Patricia called me 4 days after the gala. The call lasted 6 minutes. She said she wanted to talk, to understand, to work through what happened as a family. I said I was available for that conversation when she was ready to be honest about what she and Marcus had done. She said I was being dramatic, which is a sentence I noted with interest because it is very close to the "you know how Jade is" framing of the narrative she had been distributing for 14 months. I told her I had the bank records, the lease documents, the email timestamps, the contract transfer paperwork, and an attorney who had been building the documentation file for over a year. I said when she was ready to be honest, I was available. Then I ended the call. She has not called again. Marcus sent a text message in January. He did not apologize. He said he hoped we could eventually get past this as a family. I read it twice. I thought about the $34,000 removed in increments from an account I had built from nothing. I thought about 4 years of client relationships dismantled through access I had given in good faith. I thought about 2 years of a story circulating through a community that had known me since childhood. A story designed to make sure that nothing I said would be taken seriously. I have not responded. I may not. Uncle Derek came to Columbus in February. We had dinner at a restaurant near my apartment for 3 hours. He did not come to broker anything. He came because he is Patricia's brother and he had watched what happened and he owed me the acknowledgement of his physical presence in the room. He was honest about what he had known and when he had known it and what he had not done when he could have. I appreciated the honesty. It did not repair anything. Some things cannot be repaired by honesty alone, but honesty is where any real thing has to start, and I respected that he knew that. Grace reached out in January through a professional network message. She said she had wanted to contact me for 2 years and had not known how. She said setting down the clipboard at the gala was the first thing she had done in a long time that felt true. She is working at a different event company now. We have spoken twice. She is not the villain of this story. She was a person in a difficult position who made understandable choices. I do not forget, but I understand. I want to tell you about the 2 years in Columbus before December 14th, because I think the way I have told this story up to now makes those years sound like pure loss, and they were not. They were the hardest 2 years of my life and also, in ways that took me a long time to see clearly, among the most useful. Before Marcus and Patricia, I had built with instinct and momentum. I trusted easily. I gave access without formal boundaries. I added co-signatories to operating agreements during health scares without reading every downstream consequence of the clause. I was a gifted operator running on genuine passion and natural skill and the uncomplicated belief that the people around me were operating in good faith. After, I built differently. I built slowly. I built with Sandra's voice in my ear at every structural decision, reminding me to document everything, to put every agreement in writing, to give no access that was not formally bounded and revocable. I built the Columbus business the way you rebuild after a structural failure, carefully, with better materials, with an understanding of exactly which load-bearing element had failed before. I learned things about money in those 2 years that I had not known before, even after 4 years of running a business. Not just cash flow and revenue, but the architecture of what you actually own versus what you generate. The difference between income, which is a flow, and assets, which are structures. The specific, non-obvious power of a signed lease document in your LLC's name on a building someone else is operating out of. Sandra helped me see this. The lease was the most important document in this story, not because it gave me the building back. I didn't want the building. I had rebuilt in Columbus and I was not going back, but because it was the evidence that they had built everything they had on a foundation they did not own. They could take the clients and the contracts and the money and the reputation. They could not take the ground. Know what you own. It is the single most important piece of operational knowledge I can give you. Not what you make, not what you manage, what you own. What is documented. What is in your name, specifically and precisely, on a signed and registered legal instrument. Because everything else can be taken from you by someone with access and motive and a mother who is willing to sign a document. But what is genuinely, legally, documentably yours requires a different kind of effort to take, and sometimes not always, but sometimes that effort is the thing they don't make. There are things I cannot recover from what happened. The $34,000 is gone. I have not pursued it through litigation yet, though the documentation exists and the option remains open. The original corporate client relationships are mostly gone. The specific growth trajectory I was on at 26, the second location in Hyde Park, the expanding team, the Meridian contract as a foundation to build from, I cannot get that back. The math of lost time does not close neatly. I am 31 years old. I am 4 years behind where I would have been. I also lost my family, not on December 14th. Long before that, I lost them at the moment my mother decided that one child's success was more important than the other child's existence. I lost them when Marcus walked into a business I had built and decided that it belonged to whoever could take it rather than whoever had made it. I lost them when they built a story around me and distributed it through every community I belonged to, and committed to that story so fully that, by the time I walked into the gala, my mother's contempt was genuine. She had told the story so many times she had become a person who believed it. I don't know if those relationships can be repaired. I don't know if I want them to be, in the form they existed. Those are questions I am living with, not questions I have answered. What I kept was this. I kept my knowledge. 4 years of running a catering and events operation gave me something that cannot be transferred or transferred back. The specific, embodied intelligence of someone who has done this work at scale, who has managed a team through a difficult service, and who has built client trust from a cold start and maintained it through consistency and care. That knowledge is in my hands and in my instincts, and in my ability to walk into any professional kitchen and immediately understand what is happening and what needs to happen. Nobody took that. It was never available to take. I kept Sandra. I kept Uncle Derek, in a revised and honest form. I kept Grace, tentatively, at the distance appropriate to someone rebuilding trust from a complicated starting point. And I kept the version of myself that knows, with the particular certainty that comes from having had everything questioned by the people who were supposed to be on your side. Exactly what she built, and exactly how she built it. That is a thing that nobody could write out of my history, not even the people who tried the hardest. I want to say something about the hoodie one more time, because I think there is a lesson in it that goes beyond the story I just told you. When I chose to walk into that gala in a hoodie and jeans, I was not making a statement about not caring what people thought. I was making a statement about exactly what I thought. I was saying, you handed me a costume. You told everyone I looked this way. You built an entire social architecture around a version of me that was diminished and unstable and unreliable. And I am going to walk through that door, wearing that costume and carrying a document that destroys everything you built on the assumption that I had nothing. The gap between the image and the reality is the point. The contrast is the message. The hoodie was not weakness. The hoodie was the end of a very long sentence. I want to say something about patience too, because I think patience is the most misunderstood concept in situations like this one. People think patience means waiting passively while something unjust continues. It does not. Patience, when it is purposeful, is the most active thing you can practice. Every day that I did not post about what Marcus and Patricia had done, I was choosing December 14th. Every shift I worked in Columbus, I was rebuilding toward December 14th. Every conversation I did not have with every cousin who had heard the story, I was protecting December 14th. 14 months of active, disciplined restraint in the direction of one specific, documented, legally clean moment that is not passivity. That is the kind of work that does not show anywhere until the moment it shows everywhere. I want to name the homeless and crazy narrative for what it is, because naming it matters, and because I know that some of the people listening to this have had versions of it used against them. When someone builds something from nothing, and the people around them want access to what has been built, the first thing they take is not the asset. The first thing they take is the narrative. They establish, in the social spaces they control, a version of you that will make their subsequent actions look defensible. If you are unstable, then their intervention is rescue. If you are unreliable, then their takeover is stewardship. If you are going through things, then your version of events is suspect. The narrative is the instrument that makes everything else possible. This is why fighting a story with a louder story rarely works. Rumors travel faster than facts and feel more vivid and require no documentation. You cannot outshout a well-established narrative in the same social spaces where the narrative has already been running for months. What you can do, what I did, is wait for the moment where a fact lands so definitively that the narrative cannot absorb it. A document. A date. A lease. A legal non-renewal notice served at 3 o'clock on the afternoon of the most important evening in the other person's professional calendar. Facts are slower than rumors, but they last longer, and they are not subject to the same erosion. A rumor depends on the next person who tells it to hold its shape. A document just sits there and remains what it is. I want to say something about my mother, because this story is not a simple one, and I want to honor that complexity, even in a context where it would be easy not to. I do not believe Patricia is a simple villain. I believe she is a person who made a choice, and then made a series of choices to justify that first choice. and then kept making choices until she had constructed a worldview in which what she had done to me was not only acceptable but necessary and even good. She told the story so many times and to so many people that she had to keep telling it, because to stop would be to look directly at what the story was covering. She needed the version of me that couldn't handle it. She committed to that version fully. By the time I walked into the gala, her contempt was not performed. It was genuine. She had become a person who genuinely believed I was a problem to be managed rather than a daughter who had been wronged. I don't know what she does with December 14th now. I genuinely don't. I think about it sometimes. What I know is that you cannot build something real on a foundation you do not own. You cannot build an identity on a story that requires another person's failure to remain true. Sooner or later, the person at the bottom of the story does something that the story cannot explain. Sooner or later, the ground shifts. If you are the person in your family who built something quietly while everyone else got the recognition, if you are the one who got written off and spoken about and cast as the cautionary tale at gatherings where your own work was being celebrated under someone else's name, then I want to say this to you with the specificity of someone who has been exactly where you are. Your silence is not agreement. Your absence is not concession. The fact that you have not yet fought loudly is not evidence that you have lost. Sometimes the most powerful move available to you is the one you make on a Tuesday afternoon, in a legal notice, filed with a landlord who confirms receipt in writing, set to activate at midnight on the night they chose for their celebration. Document everything. Know what is in your name. Read every clause. Give access carefully and revocably, and with a full understanding of what you are giving. Do not add signatories during health scares without consulting an attorney about the downstream implications. And if someone has already taken what you built, find Sandra Okafor or someone like her, and sit down with the documents you kept, and build the most patient, most precise, most legally clean case that the situation allows. The story is not over when the other person thinks it is. The story is over when you say it is. My name is Jade Calloway. I am 31 years old. I do not have the Oakley kitchen. I do not have the Meridian contract. I do not have 4 years of growth that were taken from me, and I cannot calculate the cost of that loss with any precision. What I have is the Columbus business, the documentation, Sandra, Uncle Derek, Grace at a careful distance, and the specific knowledge of a woman who built something real from nothing and watched what happened when she stopped paying attention to what she owned. I am paying attention now. I am not done yet. There is something I want to talk about that does not usually get discussed in stories like this one. It is the part that happens before the betrayal. The part that made the betrayal possible in the first place. When you build something truly alone, without a co-founder or a financial backer, or a family that treats what you are doing as real, you develop a particular relationship with external validation. You learn to operate without it. You learn to function on the internal knowledge that the numbers are correct, and the work is solid, and the clients are returning. Even when nobody in your personal life is saying the words that would make that feel externally confirmed. You become self-sustaining in a way that looks like strength, and mostly it is strength, but it also creates a specific blind spot. Because when someone finally shows up and says, "I see what you have built. I want to be part of it. Let me help," the relief of that can override the careful, analytical attention you would otherwise bring to the situation. Marcus said the right words. He said, "You have built something real." He said, "I want to learn from you." He said, "You are running yourself into the ground and I can take some of this weight." And I heard all of it through the filter of a woman who had been building alone for 4 years without a single person in her immediate family ever saying those things. This is not an excuse for what he did. It is not a reason to feel ashamed of the access I gave him. It is context. It is the human mechanism that made a careful and operationally experienced person hand over access she would not otherwise have given. And I name it because I think it matters for anyone who is building alone and has someone in their life who suddenly starts paying attention after years of absence. Be careful with the people who discover your value late. Not because every such person is a Marcus. Most are not. But because the relief of being seen, especially by someone who shares your last name, can be a feeling powerful enough to make you generous in ways that the actual history does not warrant. Feelings are real. they are also not always accurate representations of risk. I am not a cautious person by nature. I run on vision and instinct and full commitment. These are the qualities that built Callaway Catering and Events from a church potluck to a 6-person operation. They are also the qualities that made me a person who could be taken advantage of by someone who understood them and positioned himself within them. I have made my peace with this not because I forgive easily, but because the thing that made me vulnerable was also the thing that built the business. I would rather be the person who builds and loses than the one who never builds, because she is too careful to try. What I carry forward is not suspicion as a default, but structure as a default. Document the trust, bound the access, review the agreements regularly and formally. Know who has your signature on file and for what purpose and under what conditions. Not because everyone is acting in bad faith, but because documentation protects even the people who deserve your trust and removes the ambiguity that bad faith requires to operate. Build carefully, trust deliberately, and always know what is in your name. The Oakley Kitchen was in my name. That is the only reason December 14th was possible. One document, one signed commercial lease. One LLC registered alone on a Thursday afternoon because I was 22 and had no one else to put on the paperwork. That single administrative fact, filed in Hamilton County property records, was the thing that everything else ultimately rested on. The $34,000 was gone. The Meridian contract was gone. The clients were gone. The staff was gone. But the ground under the building they were running the gala in was still mine, because I had signed it 9 years ago with my own hand. You never know which document will matter most. So document everything. Keep everything. Scan it. Save it in triplicate. Maintain it in a cloud folder accessible only to you and, if necessary, a lawyer you trust. Not because you are paranoid. Because you are building something real. And real things deserve the protection of real records. I learned this through loss. I am telling you so that you can learn it without the same tuition. It has been almost a year since December 14th. Here is the honest account of where things are. The Columbus business continued to grow after the gala. Not because the gala made me visible or gave me a platform. I never publicized what happened. What I mean is that a correctly built foundation continues to support more weight when you add it carefully. In February, I hired a third part-time assistant. In April, I signed a short-term lease on a shared commercial kitchen in Columbus that gives me the certified address and the equipment access required for larger private events without the overhead of a standalone facility. It is a smaller arrangement than the Oakley space was. It is entirely in my name, with no co-signatories, no emergency third parties, and no clauses I have not read 3 times. MCG Events is still operating. They relocated to a shared kitchen in Blue Ash and refiled their licenses and absorbed the loss of the January contract. Marcus is resourceful and he can talk to people, and those qualities do not disappear because the ground shifted beneath him. He is rebuilding. I imagine he is doing it more carefully now, with a clearer understanding of what a commercial lease requires and what happens when you build on a foundation you did not actually secure. I do not wish him harm. I wish him the specific education that comes from consequences. My mother continues in her life. I have heard through Uncle Derek that the story has evolved again. The current version is that there was a complicated legal and business dispute within the family, very difficult for everyone involved. That is a substantial revision from the earlier version involving my breakdown and difficult period. I note the revision without surprise. Stories adjust to accommodate what can no longer be denied. That is how stories work. Uncle Derek and I have dinner once a month when I drive to Cincinnati. He is thinking differently about things now, about what the family has been and what it has cost people through its habits. These are good conversations. They do not resolve anything that has been broken, but honesty between people who have been operating in less than honesty for a long time is a different kind of foundation than comfort, and it is one I can build on. Grace and I spoke again in May. She told me more about her experience during the MCG Events period, the things she had known and the choices she had made and the weight of them. I listened. I asked honest questions. I did not offer absolution, because that is not mine to give, and I am not certain it would serve her or me. What I offered was honest accounting of the impact. She received it. We are building something careful and slow, and I do not yet have a name for what it will become. My cousin Megan texted me in March. She had heard what happened secondhand and wanted me to know she was glad. That she had always known the original story was not right. I appreciated it. I also noted that she had not said anything during the 14 months it mattered most, which is its own kind of information. People who support you privately when it is safe are better than people who do not support you at all. They are not the same as people who support you openly when it costs them something. I am keeping careful track of the difference. I am 31 years old. I have a business that is mine, structured correctly, growing at a pace I can manage. I have Sandra, who has become more than an attorney over these 14 months, something in the range of advisor and, carefully, friend. I have Uncle Derek. I have the possibility of grace. I have the complicated cousin network and the knowledge of how to move through it with appropriate care. I have my mother at whatever distance that relationship currently requires, which is significant distance. I have my brother at the distance created by an unanswered text message and the specific gravitational pull of $34,000 unaddressed dollars. These distances may change. I hold that possibility without foreclosing it and without rushing toward it. And I have this, which I want to say plainly. I know what I built. I know every step of how I built it. From the church potluck, to the Meridian contract, to the commercial lease, to the health scare signatory clause, to the 4 months of infiltration, to the 2 years in Columbus, to Sandra's October phone call to the non-renewal, notice filed at 3 p.m. on December 14th. I know the sequence in its entirety. Nobody can revise that knowledge. It exists in me in a way that the kitchen and the contracts and the $34,000 do not. That is not sufficient. I will not tell you that it is enough, because it is not. What was taken was real, and its absence is real. And the math of lost time and lost growth does not simplify into something tidy, but it is a foundation. It is what you build the next thing on. And I am building. That is enough for now. That is enough for today. If this story found you at the right moment, if you are the one your family wrote off, the one they explained away, the one who has been waiting for the right moment in the right room with the right document, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the only thing standing between a person and their next move is knowing that someone else walked this road and came out the other side still standing. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every single one. Some of your stories in the comments are harder than mine and longer, and I want you to know I see them. If you want to stay in this community, subscribe and hit the bell. More stories are coming. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.